Today, we want to ask ourselves, what could the DRC accession into the EAC mean for the EAC as a whole, for this configuration? Thank you, Kwame. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So what I asked myself as I was looking at this problem and just following the accession process of the DRC is that, number one, can we determine what benefits DRC accession will accrue and for whom, right, with a cursory glance? And secondly, what does the EAC treaty have to say about accession? And thirdly, what is the current demographic and economic profile of the DRC? I asked myself this third question because I sought to determine the benefits by looking at the demographics and the economic profile. And finally, how might the DRC contribute to the EAC? To start off with, the EAC is an intergovernmental organization. EAC actually stands for the East African Community, and this community is currently made up of Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and South Sudan. Presently, the DRC has also indicated an interest to join. Now, this happened about 2020. In that time, or in the time since, the EAC actually sent a team to prepare and lay out the groundwork for negotiations and what we call the accession process. Now, this process is actually given some bit of guidance by the EAC treaty. So the original founding members, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, when they got together in 1999 to put together this community, they had some objectives. And Article 3, with these 6 clauses that I've outlined right here, the A, B, C, D, and E, actually tell us what it takes for a country to join the EAC. So in order for the DRC to join and for any other country to join, they have to accept the structure of the EAC as it is. So a joining member cannot change what they find, right? Secondly, the new member has to respect social justice, human rights, good governance, democracy, and the rule of law, right? So there is a desire among the founding members for the EAC to be reflective of, to be a society that is free, fair, just, and there's a recognition that this is a foundation for prosperity. Thirdly, each country is required to operate a market economy and social policies like those of the community. The country that's joining the EAC should actually strengthen the EAC. The country that's joining has to share borders with the EAC. And finally, when the members finally enter the EAC, they can't change the requirements. And the current member states can also they can't change the requirements for future members. So the EAC actually has ambitions in economic and political integration. We're interested today in the economic integration. We see around the world that this kind of integration is not unique. You have your European Union, and you have all manner of attempts to integrate the economies of nations, whether they're in regions neighboring each other or far-flung across the world. So why do countries why do they seek to integrate themselves in any way, whether economically or politically? Well, we can see that if we use the principles of economics, there's a demand for integration, right? This is what we can see when the DRC itself says that they also want to join and they indicated interest and they make an application and the application is considered. So there's a desire among member states to, amongst those who create these kind of organizations to come together because there's a benefit that they can see down the road. Now, with regards to the EAC and specifically the DRC accession and the DRC joining the EAC, there's not so much that has been said. You can't find precise details that say President Tshisekedi, has said these are the numbers. This is how we think we can benefit from joining the EAC. Similarly, we also don't have a similar analysis of what EAC members expect that DRC joining the EAC will do for them, right? So what we did was to take a look at some numbers and try to see what could happen. Starting off demographically, we have here a chart that is on the country area size in square kilometers. So of course, when the Congo joins the EAC will actually be much larger than it was. Congo is the 11th largest country in the world. That's what we can see from the table. Russia is the largest country, and when the DRC joins the EAC will actually become the 7th largest entity in the world. Now, this is interesting for some people because of the conversation that's been held and the ambitions, actually the ambitions for political integration, right? So the EAC treaty actually talks about the desire for the EAC to become, for the East African community to become a political entity, so one country, right? So if it did become one country, it would be the 7th largest in the world. In terms of population, this is how the EAC population currently compares to some of the largest countries in the world. The United States has a population of 329 million. We put it here because it's a very prosperous country, so it's interesting for us to compare with them. And if you observe, the 5th bar is actually the population of the EAC in its current configuration. So we have 195 million people, right? So when the DRC joins, actually this number will grow to 284 million. If Somalia and Ethiopia were also to join, then the EAC would actually have a population of 415 million. Now, I mentioned Ethiopia and Somalia because they too have actually indicated an interest in joining. The current Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, actually mentioned his desire for his country to join the EAC. Uhuru has been there at least once or twice in the last few years, and he's actually secured a few business. He's helped, or his administration, I should say, has facilitated the entry of some Kenyan corporate interests in Ethiopia. And as for Somalia, Somalia's interest to join is actually being considered as we speak. So that is why the two are here on the chart. But these numbers are not enough. Another question I asked myself was, okay, what do we know? What can we see about the evolution of the population of this region? I picked out Somalia, the Congo, South Sudan, and Rwanda for the fact that they've had a tumultuous, very tumultuous history, right, politically and economically. So I wanted to see if that tells us anything about if that has had an effect on their population growth. So we can see here that Somalia actually had Somalia's population growth rate actually jumped in the 70s, only to drop, and then in the 90s. Rwanda's population growth had a very sharp dip in the 90s. Congo's population growth seems a bit more stable, but on the whole, actually, the region's population has grown, right? And it continues to grow. Well, another question we might ask ourselves about the population, the people living within a region, is how are they moving around? Well, when we consider the political upheavals that a country like the DRC has experienced, we might ask ourselves what effect that has had on migration. So the DRC has actually continues to experience a large, a situation of migrants of distress, right? A lot of people are continuously fleeing the DRC and leaving to places that they consider safer. This statistic here is provided by the UNHCR. And so these are actually the refugees under the mandate of the UNHCR. So 70% of migrants in distress, of the people who have fled the DRC to the Horn of Africa region, have settled in Tanzania, right? This pie chart is actually showing what share it's DRC migrant of distress to the Horn of Africa. People have been leaving the DRC, fleeing the DRC into the Horn of Africa region. So this pie chart tells us where they've preferred to go. Tanzania took in 70% of those who fled to the Horn of Africa. Rwanda took in another 17%. So those two countries actually took the largest share of these migrants of distress. Why might this be? Well, we know one thing we can see is that Rwanda and Tanzania actually share borders with the Congo. This again shows the refugees under the UNHCR's mandate. This is actually refugees from the DRC. Please pardon me if I forgot to add the DRC to the title. So this chart shows that the rate of refugees, of people fleeing the Congo, has continued to increase over time, and has actually had a very pitched increase since the year 2000, right? In 2021, by 2021, about 800,000 people fled the DRC. Internally, we also see the same kind of instability in population. So this IDPs actually means internally displaced persons, right, of concern to the UNHCR. So this again is within the Congo. We can see that since 2016, the number of internally displaced persons has only continued to increase, right? By 2020, we had 5 million people within the Congo who were internally displaced. So all this put together tells us that the Congo is experiencing, we know and we read that the Congo is experiencing instability, but this actually shows us what that instability means, how people are experiencing it. People are fleeing the Congo, and they also are, even within the Congo itself, they're displaced. They don't live where they used to live, right? So when we ask ourselves what this means for the DRC's accession into the EAC, well, for one, the EAC seems to already be a stabilizing factor, right? Congolese find it safe to migrate to Kenya, to migrate to Tanzania, to flee, right? To run away to Rwanda, to run away to Uganda. But we don't see the same thing happening the other way, right? We don't see Kenyans fleeing to the Congo, or Kenyans or Tanzanians are not fleeing to the Congo. South Sudanese are not fleeing to the Congo. So we can see that the Congo has benefited from regional stability. This means that as the Congo joins the EAC, then they can expect to continue to benefit from this stability. Perhaps a migration into the EAC becomes more formalized, and the movement of workers becomes more formalized, and someone can move from the Congo and go and work in Kenya, or work in Tanzania, or do whatever it is that or simply even to be safe, right? That's what we can see. Now, the next question is, since we can see that people are fleeing, people are moving from the Congo, and they're also leaving to other places in around the world, mind you, but they're moving to the region, then what is the character of the DRC economy? What is the character of the EAC economy? And what can we see? What does this tell us about how the DRC will benefit by joining the community? And so the first thing I looked at here is the economic complexity. Now, economic complexity is a tool that is used to bring a certain kind of understanding about the character of an economy, right? So complexity is a measure of knowledge, of know-how, right? We know how to make this. Is basically what the economic complexity index is telling us. The economic complexity index is like if I had two chefs and I wanted to compare to understand what it is that makes one chef from, say, Kempinski, a chef that can cook the wide range of foods that's offered in the Kempinski. What makes him special? What makes him different from me, who's just making, boiled eggs or fried eggs, or frying my chicken in my kitchen, right? What's the difference between us? And the difference is that the chef in Kempinski, he knows a lot more than me, he can produce very complex foods, and they're very tasty foods, right? And the result is, or what we can see is that people actually pay more to go and eat the food that chef is making than they do to come to my own kitchen. So there's something about the food he's making is more valuable. So economic complexity says, now the difference between me and that chef is that chef can cook more advanced, more difficult to make foods. He has a know-how, and he can cook a wide range of those very difficult to make foods, right? And for me, I have maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 dishes that I can make in an okay fashion, and people don't flock to my kitchen to eat my food. So in the same way, now we look at Japan. If we say Japan is a cook, they have the highest economic complexity index in the world. So what the index does is they look at the menu of exports, right? Of goods that a country exports. It's like a menu, and say that this menu is more complex than this one. More people are paying to drive a Toyota Prado or a Lexus than they are to drink tea, for example. And now in the Congo's case, raw materials are less valuable than the finished manufactured goods. But the key here is Congo cannot wake up tomorrow and decide that they want to make a Lexus and then actually do it. They can't. They don't have the know-how. Japan, on the other hand, can ramp up its semiconductor output. It can make Lexuses today, and tomorrow it can decide to, hey, let's try and make Mitsubishi can decide, okay, we're big enough. Let's try and make an airplane. Okay, So the DRC Congo's economic complexity index ranking is 143, the lowest, one of the lowest in the world. South Sudan has 146. Japan is ranked first in the world, and Kenya is ranked first in the region, right? So the ECI is useful because it's a strong predictor for income, for future income growth rates. It's a strong predictor for wealth, right? And not just wealth, but future wealth. So this doesn't look too good for the Congo. And within the EAC itself, we have countries that are coming together that have economic complexity indices that are not too impressive, right? Here's the menu of the goods that the Congo exports, and we can see that most of the goods, I mean, more than 70% of the, or more than 80% of the goods that the Congo exports are made in raw materials, right? Different kinds of metals, different kinds of precious stones, different kinds of minerals, and that its largest export partner is China, taking in 53% of that country's exports. And what about imports? So the Congo is actually importing all kinds of very complicated to make goods, and we can see that in both in the export relations, actually Congo doesn't have very strong export relations, at least when compared to its other relationships. I mean, doesn't have strong relationship with Africa in general and the East African region in particular, right? You have 8 billion Congolese exports going out, and most of them are going to Asia. Imports. South Africa was Congo's most important import partner in Africa, particularly. And when we look at the types of goods that the Congo was importing from South Africa, the Congo was not exporting goods from South Africa that any East African country can make. So put together, these two things actually mean that when the Congo enters the East African community, the East African community might not be looking for the goods that Congo exports, and there might not be much that the region can export to the Congo. Well, except for a country like Rwanda with 5%. So Rwanda had the third largest export relationship with the Congo within Africa, right? So these are the goods that the DRC imports from South Africa. We can see a lot of machinery and appliances, which are not a strong feature of the exports of East African countries. So in terms of the trade relationship, a final thing to say is this. Congo's entry into the EAC could have some important effects in terms of trade relations. Number one, Congo has access to the Atlantic Ocean, while Kenya and Tanzania have access to the Indian Ocean. So Congo joining the EAC will actually give the EAC a reach across across the continent and into both oceans. So one thing that these charts don't tell us is what could happen if infrastructure grows, right? If we have more roads and expansion in ports, this could mean that Kenya ends up handling a lot more of the DRC's imports and exports to and fro China, for example, and which it already does. And the same can be said for future trade from the EAC, from current EAC members that want to trade with countries on the Atlantic, right? There's a possibility that now we have better access to the Atlantic at cheaper rates, and this could be good for, say, Kenyan exports. Now, let's look at the DRC's economy. This chart here shows us the DRC's percentage share of EAC plus one GDP from 1964 to 2020. What does this mean? So first of all, when I say EAC plus one, I mean EAC plus the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So the East African community in its current configuration without the Congo, right? So if we put all the GDPs of the EAC countries together, and then divide up each share, right? Like we have a pie, then and then ask ourselves the change in each country's share of that pie. What is the change of each country's share of that pie? Now, why is this? This tells us, okay, is the country actually increasing increasing in economic output in comparison to its neighbor countries, or is it shrinking? And in this case, the Congo's percentage share of the regional output has actually been dropping. I mean, what we can see is akin to it's plummeting, it's moving downwards, very, very steep decline. So the next question we might ask is, as we take a snapshot of the DRC's economy, is what is the actual economic structure of the Congo, right? If its share of, why should its share of the economy of the EAC economy be falling, right? What we can see here is a comparison of Kenya and Congo. So we compare Kenya and Congo because Kenya has the largest manufacturing footprint in the East African region. It has the largest economy also in the East African region, but at the same time, it's still an agrarian economy, right? So 23%. If we could see that agriculture took up a 23% share of Kenya's economic output, right? And services took 53%. So what this number tells us, the agriculture share, is that Kenya's is an agrarian economy. Manufacturing only took up 7% of total output. Whereas for the Congo, actually industry took up 35%. Now in the industry sector, right, actually includes construction and mining. So Congo is a strong mining country, as we saw even from the exports that it makes. So this put together tells us that, okay, number one, EAC countries have been growing much more and much faster than the DRC, right? Kenya's economy is twice the size of the DRC's economy. So what does it mean what does it mean for the DRC joining the region? Well, the DRC specializes in raw materials, so it'll benefit from using Kenya and Tanzania as continuing to use them as routes for its raw material outputs, right? But in terms of structural transformation, if labor can move where it's needed, then perhaps we get ahead of ourselves. But let's say that what we can see from this chart is that the DRC is not going to be contributing to the structural transformation of the East African community. That we can see. So official development assistance. This chart is the per capita net official development assistance. So I asked myself, okay, what does the world kind of, what else does the world think about the Congo, and what the world thinks about the Congo reflect in the kind of help that they give it? And here we can see that South Sudan actually on a per capita basis received much more official development assistance than any other country in the EAC, but also much more than the Congo. But at the same time, the Congo actually has the largest footprint of what they call, okay, the UN's is it okay, the name escapes me at the moment, but basically when you have an emergency in some part of the world, and an emergency that demands for, say, UN troops to actually go in and help to stabilize the region, and you have migration issues, well, you know, that's the kind, it tells you something about what is going on in that country. So here we have a chart that shows the percentage share of EAC plus one per capita remittances. Kenya actually took a 36% share of per capita remittances of the whole region as a total, and the Congo took 16%. So for every individual Kenyan, this chart is made up of data that says, okay, for every Kenyan for every dollar of remittances that went to Kenya, how much did each Kenyan receive? How much did each Congolese and Rwandese receive? So Kenya takes up the largest share, but Kenya does not have the largest, a bigger diaspora than the Congo. Actually, the Congo has a very large diaspora, and while the numbers are not here on this chart, the fact that this is reflected in their very large remittance bill. So when we compare the remittances to their economic output, right, it tells us that that there are a lot of Congolese abroad. They're sending you know, a large amount of money back home, but that, how do I put this? Per capita remittances. Well, when you compare remittances to the fact that one country like Kenya is not, it's not a country that people are fleeing because they fear for their life, right? Whereas the Congo, that is actually the case. Then we actually are seeing the same thing reflected here on the remittances. But what does this mean for the DRC actually joining the East African region? Well, there are a lot of Congolese who are abroad, even in, you know, and I mean, this remittance value also includes Congolese living next door in Tanzania or in Kenya and such. So Congo actually continues again to benefit from the stability of the region. If it becomes easier for Congolese to settle in where they find opportunity in the region, then that also serves as a stabilizing factor for the Congo itself, because these people will be sending money back to their relatives. Right. Finally, I had an interest in in what is called the Economic Freedom Index, because the question here is, what are the economic conditions like for the average Congolese? What can we kind of try to ascertain about what it's like to do business, right, in the Congo? Now, the Economic Freedom Index is built on it's built on the same principles that are reflected in the EAC treaty, right? The first thing we looked at said that the EAC requires that member countries actually, the member states actually manage the economy in a particular way, right? Talk about a free market, talk about justice, social justice, human freedoms, right? These are the principles that these countries aspire to. Now, the facts on the ground say, might say a different story, but it does mean something that all the countries of the region have actually taken this piece of paper, this treaty, taken it to their local legislature, signed it, and said, these are principles that we hold ourselves to. Now, this is the result. Now, so you said that this is what you wanted to do. Now, what are you actually doing? Where are you on that journey to accomplish that, to fulfill those values, those very high values of human freedom, and here interpreted through the lens of economic freedom, right? The Congo here is the worst performing in the region and amongst the worst in the world. So they actually rank 165, and in the region rank, this is in sub-Saharan Africa, they rank 43 actually. Rwanda ranks first in the region and ranks 47th in the world. So this index of economic freedom is actually measured through, there are 4 pillars. There's the rule of law, the size of government, regulatory efficiency, and open markets. So basically, what is a state? This index measures the economic freedom by measuring the rule of law, right? Does the rule of law prevail? Is the government big and excessively intrusive, so infringing upon the economic freedoms of the citizens? Are regulations inefficient? So inefficient that they actually encumber business, that you can't, and take away your economic freedom? And are the markets so closed that you also do not have economic freedom? Now, again, economic freedom is about control of our labor and capital. So,
all right, Iman,
yes.
please finish in 5.
Okay, right. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder, Kwame. So, am I free to allocate labor and capital as I wish, and in a way that doesn't infringe on others, or am I not free? So the Congo is the least free in the region. It's not joining a region. It's not joining a club of high performers, but the difference between Kenya and the Congo is significant, and Rwanda and the Congo in terms of all these freedoms. So the rule of law is not prevalent. The Congolese government is not very big, but it's not a stabilizing factor in the Congo. Regulations are so lax that actually labor is exploited in a negative way, and even though the markets are free in the sense that there's a lot that you can do, there are the factors like corruption and instability that actually make it less free of a market than it could be. So put together, the Congo joining the EAC will not be joining, although it's not joining a club of very strong performers, it's the weakest among them. So the EAC is not, on the one hand, the EAC is not keen on just letting just any country join, and there's a process of trying to verify the institutional strength and capacity of a nation to join. But and judging from the fact that the negotiations are the negotiations are ongoing, and it looks like the DRC might actually join. Well, we can look at that and say that at least the East African bureaucracy thinks that the Congo is ready to join. Yep, and so on the whole, the DRC is probably going to benefit from the stability that the East African region offers. So the East African region may not be the most free, it might not be the most advanced, but it does offer a degree of stability, and this is evidenced by how Congolese actually they voted with their feet, right, and moved to these countries. Thank you. I'll now close it and open up the plenary session.
Right. Thank you very much. Emmanuel, you may switch off your camera now. Thanks a lot. So let me try and summarize what Emmanuel has done. The discussion was split into three broad areas. But in general, one of the things that he asked is, what's the status of the EAC, speaking about each of the countries, a little background to what the treaty is about, and then went into a rundown of the membership. So we have the 6 members, with the DRC making an application to become the 7th. Of course, there's also a couple of other membership decisions that need to be made regarding Somalia, Ethiopia, and perhaps the Sudan as well. Then he laid out the economic facts and social facts. I think the most salient of the economic facts is that if you look at the trajectory of growth from the EAC, that all EAC countries have been growing at a much faster rate than the DRC. So DRC's income per capita, I think, peaked at some time in just before the 80s. And since then, for whatever reason, most of which are political, in addition to the instability that has faced some parts of the country, East African countries, EAC countries, the 6 EAC countries taken together have been growing much, much faster than the DRC. It's been growing much, much slower. So if some of the objectives for regional integration, which is to make for more sensible use of resources across borders, but also economic integration on one side, then obviously the logic for that exists. I think the second one is that all of the countries of the EAC, with the exception of Kenya, actually have borders with the DRC, telling us something about just the size of the country. So starting all the way from Sudan to Uganda to Rwanda, Burundi, and to Tanzania, all these 5 countries have a border with the EAC, with the exception of Kenya. So thinking about what basic integration methodology requires, I think, and the requirements of the treaty in East Africa, I think it fits, because it's obviously a neighbor in every sense of that word, having a contiguous border with at least 5 of those of the 6 countries so far. So that's another important thing. Then Emmanuel went into the economic complexity, comparing the economic complexity of these countries, and specifically concentrating on Kenya vis-a-vis the Congo. He says, comparing those, obviously DRC, because of its resource endowment, has a very huge, in comparative terms, as a share of its GDP industry and manufacturing, by virtue of the fact that the extraction of minerals and their services that are affiliated obviously requires a degree of manufacturing. It might not be large, but basically that, as a share of the GDP of the gross domestic product, is actually quite large, even compared to Kenya. And it's in terms of the ratio of GDP, DRC has a higher manufacturing and a higher industry than Kenya would. But all countries, in terms of employment, are still very agro-based. So again, there are similarities and there are differences among EAC countries. But the function of integration, the logic of integration among economies, and the economic literature suggests that, yes, it's countries that have a dispersion or differences of this kind that would actually allow for or that forms a good check for integration, because those differences allow for economies of scale, but also allow for comparative advantages to be built. So DRC seems to have some, Kenya seems to have, and comparing those two countries, and I think the rest of the EAC region, that suggests there is. Demographically, if you take all the countries together, obviously to make for a very huge population, again, talking of it both as a market, but also as a social environment, that would be huge and actually quite impressive too. Then he talked about complexity and economic freedom. Again, the DRC, based on the challenges of the country, I think we ought to be careful. The treaty, the EAC treaty, calls for countries to stay on a democratic path, which is a very important thing. I think part of the stability is expected to come from those choices that are made. Now, while the rest of East Africa is not necessarily that much safe, but obviously the challenges of the DRC are stark and outstanding. And it's mentioned by the number of refugees. Again, most of those refugees that come from the DRC, as recorded in the literature that Emmanuel referred to, go to the other EAC countries, but principally to Tanzania. So suggesting that there's something about that integration that's already taking place, but also the displacement of people and movement of people across the borders that mostly confines them within the EAC areas. Then he spoke about the remittances. The argument about remittances has fallen on countries. I wish he talked about the foreign direct investment, because that would also have provided an opportunity for us to examine to what extent DRC's accession may change the foreign direct investment structure within the EAC. Of course, it is not coordinated, but the point about foreign direct investment is also obviously foreign direct investments would also come in a way that considers what's the broader area, what is the security, what are the trade incentives, what does a common external tariff mean, what is an accession across that border, I mean across the, from a common external tariff, which has not been completed among the EAC members, but is a work in progress, a free trade area, and eventually to, if a monetary union is achieved, a customs union, and obviously a monetary union is achieved over time. So there's some scope to be made, but I think the lesson that Emmanuel is telling us that there are challenges, there are opportunities, but there are challenges, and it is very, very clear that integration, especially the economic social integration that we have, would provide an interesting dynamic for the rest of the East African community, and actually there's a strong logic for that. I disagree with Emmanuel in saying that EAC coming to Ethiopia, that the DRC coming in would not allow for economic complexity to expand. I'm not too sure that that's right, or that if that's what it means, because the nature of complexity comes from the fact that if there's a new factor of production, even just the number of people from the DRC affecting labor markets, or without movement, but basically integrating economies generates new dynamism. And that might actually allow for that structural transformation within the DRC to take place. So it's not real. I think we need not look at it in terms of what's the static effect, because the trade factors or position within the DRC, or rather within the EAC as total, together with the DRC, is going to change quite substantially based on the fact that there's a new member, it's very large, it's bringing in new resources at play, whether they're still at the domestic level or not. They'll have opportunities for trade and obviously for cross-border trade, and that will have substantial effects on the DRC. So we shouldn't look at it in a fixed way. Emmanuel, I wish you had included the numbered your charts, because then that would have allowed people to, our colleagues to ask questions based on specific slide numbers. So that didn't happen. So whoever has questions, we just have to ask them against that. Now, I see a number of questions in the chat, so let me start with those. So the first one comes from Galgalo. Galgalo is just Galgalo Guyo. He says that accession request by Congo to the EAC is news too. I'm happy to listen to this incisive presentation. So thanks a lot, Galgalo. That's just basically a compliment. The other one is from Alan Oginga. So Alan says, I am skeptical about the true value of the uncontrolled growth of the EAC. As we know, economic union unblocks about many things. The values and culture of DRC and Somalia, for example, may be alien to the vision of the EAC. He adds that it's important to learn from history. The breakup of the original EAC is an important case in point. So maybe you can respond to that, Emmanuel. The troubles with Greece in the EU is another. Though, of course, I think the troubles in the EU is not related to integration, it's related to monetary union, which is a completely different thing, but maybe Emmanuel will provide that distinction. Then John Mutua added that it's UN peacekeeping mission. Yes, I think that's a point that could be added. And I think Stephen Jairo says there are varied motives for UN peacekeeping missions in the DRC, including the scramble for mineral resources. I'm not too sure you have evidence for that, Stephen. So we have to be very careful. Accession may come with a whole lot of different outcomes. It is a wait and see situation. That's your take. Good. It's important to say that that's your opinion. But I think there's an elaborate set of documents that the government of Kenya has and various arms of government have about what the accession is about. So one of the things that I advise is perhaps Emmanuel should provide us with a link to the treaty, because it's important to talk about what EAC accession into what DRC accession into the EAC or the EAC expansion is about, by knowing what the values, what the goals of the treaty are first. It starts with knowing what the goals of the treaty and to what extent this demand for membership will contribute towards us goal. Because a treaty, the EAC treaty, and its success will be assessed according to the objectives that has been stated in it. And some of those objectives come from economic. They're obviously even environmental and regional, coming down all the way to economic, social, and all the way to political. So Emmanuel, please respond to those questions before I take from the plenary.
Okay, thank you, Kwame. Thank you actually for pointing out the static versus dynamic effect. Yes, I should actually be more precise on that to say that when we talk about economic complexity, it's not just adding 1 + 1. You know, even if we look at the simple example of a chef, the chef in Kempinski and myself, if I join the Kempinski, I might not be as good as that chef. You know, I mean, to put it a bit crudely, right? But the Congo joining the EAC will not necessarily have just a negative effect on the region's economic complexity, because you do have labor that can now move more freely. You have capital that can move freely, perhaps capital that can find avenues of expression in Kenya that it could not in the Congo, and vice versa. We also we see, for example, that in the last year, one of the trips, you know, that Kenyatta has made, he's made I think more than one trip to the DRC and more than one trip to Ethiopia, and in both cases there were corporate interests that were following in his wake, so to speak, right? Safaricom entering the Ethiopian telecoms market, and Equity entering the Congolese financial services and financial intermediation, right? So what does Equity signal when it tries to enter the DRC market? Well, it signals that it sees an opportunity for financial intermediation. This is an expansion in the services industry. So there's some skill that's missing, some know-how that's missing in the Congo, and some capital that's missing in the Congo. And Kenya, through Equity, Kenyan investors are able to find a place that they can both deliver value and earn some returns. So this is actually this is growth for both sides. So Kwame was very correct in pointing that out, that we should not look at this in terms of static effects, but talk about the dynamic effects. Now the next question was about I hope I restate this correctly. There's a concern about the values of the DRC and Somalia not fitting in with the values of the EAC. I would put it like this. I think that the EAC actually has a desire to build a customs union, an economic union, a free trade area, customs union, an economic union, a monetary union, and a political union. So these 5 are actually very different. When we start with a free trade area, right? That's like the relationship between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. Are there benefits to these countries? Yes. Mexico actually benefited by when NAFTA was signed. American car manufacturers actually moved parts of their value chain to Mexico. So Mexicans now entered the manufacturing value chain, and they earned, their incomes increased, and Americans were able to build, cheaper cars. So there were benefits to both sides. I mean, and those are just, I've just mentioned a few of them, right? When if we also the next thing is a customs union, right? So free trade area is about labor and capital being able to move freely. Customs union is about harmonization of external policies, right? I hope I got that correct. So, for example, harmonization of tariffs. So, any country external to the EAC trying to export to the EAC will be charged the same tariff whether they export to Congo or Kenya, right? So already you can see that there is a different kind of a benefit that each country earns. So if Somalia is in a customs union with Kenya, well, at that level, people are not necessarily the concern is not about a specific cultural value, if that is what he was talking about, right? It's the economic trade, right? Then we move to the level we said customs union, monetary union. Now this is what the European Union actually has, right? So one currency. I think, first of all, monetary and political union are very, very high ambitions. They're also difficult because basically what you have with the monetary union, you have one currency, you have one guy, one central bank, controlling the value of, or rather setting the monetary policy. It's very difficult for let's say a Somali or a Kenyan to listen to Arusha say, right? Arusha being the capital, and to listen to them to agree to cede monetary policy to them. And I'll also allow Kwame to comment on that a bit more and say why, what a monetary union could mean and what its demerits might be for the region. And now political union, that is also a different question. Having one president, the same thing. It's difficult for Kenyans to go and lecture South Sudan on how they should be running their politics, and it's also difficult to imagine that Museveni or there is no malice intended in what I say, right? But if a regime has been there for a certain amount of time, and to imagine that it actually, that it aspires to political union, that is quite lofty. But at the same time, it's not a necessary prerequisite for economic welfare. And I think there's a lot of value there, and that we can put off the political question and focus on this. That's in my opinion. Now that's my opinion. So in terms of values, we don't have to worry about that. And at the end of the day, trade does a lot to bring people closer together. I'll leave it at that. Yeah, I hope I answered all of them. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Just wanted everybody to understand that I've sent in a link to the treaty, which would be important for everybody to look at, so that we debate and discuss the effects of accession based on the obligations and the objectives of the treaty, as opposed to what we assume they should be or what we assume they are. It's just more important for more accurate and more informed discussion. Okay. Now, There's a question here as well about by Oyugi, and he says, cognizant of the reality that DRC has historically been captive to negative. Okay, so I'm back. So we are saying that cognizant of the reality that DRC has historically been captive to negative geopolitical interests, can the second conclusion be argued in reverse? That is, that DRC entry having a negative effect on regional stability, to the extent that these geopolitical interests expanding their sphere of influence to other countries. Okay, Emmanuel, what do you have to say about that? Emmanuel?
Yes, yes, here I am. Yeah, so the argument in the reverse. Well, I think one would hope that that economic growth actually outpaces the you know, the bag of say we're talking about international global kleptocracy, for example, right? Yes, you know, on the one hand, if regulatory how should we put it? Because it's a tough question, and okay, there could be an argument that okay, Congo entry into the EAC actually has a negative effect on stability. Well, maybe things continue. It's difficult to say whether, for example, Mexico entering NAFTA is what made let's say the trade in narcotics from Mexico, from Colombia easier. I don't know that I see that correlation. I think the demand for, say, narcotics and all manner of those illegal substances didn't change by whether positively or negatively from Mexico entering the NAFTA. I don't know if it had a huge effect on that, right? So I don't know that I think political union, that could have more of adverse geopolitical effects, right? Because if you have one seat of power and it's that seat that you consult, and maybe that's the one seat from which a lot of the regional kleptocracy perhaps could emanate, and that's where you might go to kind of maybe obtain your rents. Maybe that case could be made, but I'm not too sure that economic integration necessarily means that that we become more unsafe. I actually think that formalization of, say, Congolese coming here is better than and gives them more opportunities to find good work, right? Legal work, than allowing all these migrants to, say, languish in kind of an informal space, so to speak. So for me personally, I would disagree with the idea that. But you know what? I should also say that it's worth thinking about more, and maybe it's something we could look into as we pass. So you know, I have to say this based on very limited knowledge, but just, yeah. Thanks.
All right. Okay. I think maybe I should. I don't know whether I should. There are questions on the chat by Rose. So let me ask one question by Rose, and let me ask, as I ask Rose's question, anybody who has a question to ask live, please switch on. I mean, rather, please use the icon at the top to raise your hand so that I can identify you and allow you to ask the question to Emmanuel. But Emmanuel, please listen to this question from Rose. Rose says, Rose says, to what extent are the current EAC members committed to the integration process? Trade disputes between Uganda and Kenya have persisted. The main border crossing between Rwanda and Uganda has been closed since 2019. DRC's accession will most likely face similar, if not worse, challenges. So that's a question from Rose Mumanya. And the other from Alan Oginga is economic blocks are very closely linked with values. Governance cannot be wished away. Therefore, there are, for example, huge challenges in NAFTA vis-a-vis. I don't know if that's a question or if that's a comment or that's an argument for re-emphasizing what has been stated before. But I agree that, so that please respond to those two. So Rose's question and yes, Rose's question, please, about the persistence of economic differences between, of differences between Uganda and Kenya.
Okay. Yes. So Alan's concern is very pertinent. I think if we take South Africa for example, and the xenophobia that South Africans have exhibited towards migrants from other regions, even particularly Congolese migrants, right? I think there's particular histories to be considered, right? The fact that, say, the kind of experience that are people.
Hi, Manuel. Just a minute, Manuel. Please stop sharing your screen. It's clouding it's clouding. Stop sharing your screen. Yes.
Okay. Stop presenting. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Right. So I think we should, when we try to make the judgment of what effect, Alan here has called it values, right? I think we're talking about the mixing of what happens when peoples who are coming from a different socio-political context mix, and the fear that this mixing can have negative results. I think we can, first of all, we can say when things are good, when the engine is running pretty well, there can be a general, if people perceive that incomes are rising and that there's opportunities to be shared, and I think if this is also reflected in the political leadership, then it's possible that integration has a positive effect. So okay, let's speak with some examples. Culturally, I think we could say that Kenyans, Tanzanians, Ugandans, what do they share? They share a similar language, a bit of a similar regional experience. And so if we compare this, what the region shares with each other versus what the whole continent shares, then as bad as regions, say Alan here fears the region, and I think regional integration. Well, regional integration has a greater chance of success than say we can compare it to the AFTA, right? So I mentioned South African xenophobia, right? And that South African leaders were themselves for political reasons, but also you could say for reasons of character, they were not able to stem the tide of South African xenophobia. And a lot of this xenophobia was directed towards Congolese, So, but that has more to do with the fact that that has at least something to do with the fact that the idea that South Africans felt that they were not benefiting from the economic rewards of the collapse of the apartheid states were not reaching them. So in that case, you do have, we can see from all the cases coming out, the administration of, say, a Jacob Zuma, and the very serious allegations being levied at them, right, and the ANC party, that it's not clear. It's clear that the ANC could have done a lot more, if not to institute good economic policies, then, well, maybe not to take so much, to steal so much of that country's wealth for themselves, while the people languishing. The optics don't look too good. And so it's easy for say leadership of a political party like that to kind of use to allow for xenophobia to happen, just allow for anything to happen that takes attention away from that fact. So I think we should separate the efforts of a political elite to actually, or let me say, of the state to put policies that encourage growth, and efforts by the state to throw to or their lack of effort to kind of like to counter matters like xenophobia. So the Congolese probably share a bit more with their maybe their Rwandese or Burundian neighbors than they do with South Africa. So I don't think that we would see the same reaction from Kenyans like we do from South Africans, because right, there's a different history there to consider. So, and I think we see the same thing with so I think finally, yes, Alan has a very good, he has a valid concern, because we do see these issues playing out in Europe. But again, I would say that we should consider what other political movements have to do with how they contribute to xenophobia. So it's not the integration itself that is bad, right, or that has a negative effect, but the scapegoating. So let's separate those two issues. That's what I would say. Let's separate those two issues, and not give the state, room to kind of to excuse themselves from their responsibilities. To what extent are EAC members committed to the integration process? That's a good question, because we have seen these challenges. I think we can say that if we look at the diplomacy, say Kenyan diplomacy, for example, Kenya has not been keen to grandstand against its neighbors. And I think this is a good thing. I think this is a signal of commitment, right? Issues do arise, but we've not seen, say, a Ministry of Foreign Affairs that is keen to shout down, or be blunt and be undiplomatic with Tanzania or with a Uganda. And we've seen a Kenya that, even with regards to Ethiopia, has been careful, has treaded very carefully in what they say about Ethiopia, right? There's been challenges with Kenya and Somalia with, say, the maritime dispute, but even that on the whole, I don't see being handled with excessive, with a kind of with overtones of grandstanding. So I would take that and say that you could say Kenya is committed. Now Tanzania, there's been a lot populism, the populism that has been a part of Tanzanian policy making kind of indicate signals a kind of a level of disinterest in the success of regional integration. And to add to that, the fact that Tanzania has also been seen to kind of play both two sides by joining SADC and the Southern African bloc, right? And there's a lot of questions around, okay, what does it mean if you have are there conflicting commitments? So for Tanzania, you might say, okay, there's quite a few glaring issues, but I think we can see that that the current president of Tanzania has actually been able to kind of have been able to bridge, to build a bridge to build bridges in that relationship. Kenya was her first place of visit. So that's an indication of interest in regional integration. There's a change in tone, right? There's a very, very perceptible change in tone. Uganda, I would also say that there are issues, yes, and even the
Emmanuel,
border,
please
yes.
move faster because we are,
Okay.
yes, please move faster.
Okay, yeah. So I think it varies from state to state. There are issues, but on the whole, you don't see excessive malice being thrown towards the integration process. Yeah.
All right. So there's a couple more questions before we close. I can see I haven't seen anyone's hands up, so we'll just read off the questions. But let me add at least something that Emmanuel has mentioned. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to be answering questions. Ladies and gentlemen, it's important for us. That's why I posted the treaty so that we can understand how we assess the treaty. And treaties such as the EAC are meant to be integration treaties, and it has four main destinations, or rather four main milestones. So the first one was to form a customs union. And a customs union basically means that there's a common external tariff, which means a tariff related to goods that come from other parts of the world. A common tariff. So we basically say if there's a good imported into Kenya from a country outside the EAC, then the tariff applied by the government of Kenya would be the same as that would be applied for the same good in Uganda and Tanzania. So basically, that's a customs union. So you have the same customs routes. The second would be a free trade area. And a free trade area means all goods and services and standards within common market. Free trade area basically means that all goods would have the same rights to be traded across the whole region without paying tariffs. So basically, it would mean that Kenyan goods are essentially like Ugandan goods. Kenyan sugar would be the equivalent of Ugandan sugar, so that you can move them across borders without. And you can tell that this is basically an escalation of the integration process. The third area is a monetary union, where in addition to goods and services moving, you actually have the single currency. So basically, say, for instance, whether it would be an East African pound, an East African shilling, or whatever name would be called, and a common central bank, as Emmanuel mentioned. And then this is expected under Article 5, as they say, to culminate in a political federation. All those are longer-term goals. And of course, there was an attempt to escalate this political federation by a committee being established a couple of years ago, and it was supposed to provide a report to the summit, which is a decision-making body of all the presidents represented in EAC, but it hasn't come forth. So these are all steps that go forward. And therefore, if you're going to judge the EAC and talk about values, I think it's also essential that you read Article 6 of the Article 5, which talks about the objectives, and Article 6, which talks about the fundamental principles of the community. And let me help by reading some of them. It talks about mutual trust, political will, and sovereign equality, peaceful coexistence and good neighborliness, peaceful settlement of disputes, good governance, including adherence to the principles of democracy, equitable distribution of benefits, and F is cooperation for mutual benefit. So if you talk about those are the values. To say that the values of EAC are not compatible, DRC are not compatible with Kenya, to be honest, is to make an elevated point that requires a little bit more discuss than that. So we understand there might be valid reasons for people to debate, but to simply say that the values are not the same. The principles that have been the principles that are actually been part of the treaty, and when a member becomes a member, it means you're accepting the treaty for what it is. It means that those articles and the principles then become part of the constraints or the rights of citizens and governments, the principles that actually determine governance at the state. So sovereignty is still recognized as a principle of the EAC up there. So I think that's an important question to do. Now, talking to Rose, you asked an important question. To what extent are the current EAC members committed to the integration process? Trade disputes between Uganda and Kenya have persisted. And Emmanuel has given it a spin, but let me give you this. I think it is a mistake to think that because there are trade disputes between Uganda and Kenya means that there's no commitment to the EAC. My only reading of the absence of a commitment to EAC is that the EAC treaty itself allows for a member to give a 12-month notice and then to leave. That, in my view, would be a commitment that a country is, or a sovereign member has chosen that the EAC is not worth our time and we are going to exit. If that exit does not exist, the treaty itself provides a mechanism for dispute settlements. So the rise of a difference between Uganda and Tanzania is not itself a reflection that the EAC is failing or that there is the absence of commitment. It is saying that the institutions that have been established under the EAC, such as mechanisms for dispute settlements, are going to kick into motion. They might be slow, they might not always meet the acceptance by everybody else, or we might not even agree with the results, but the point that Uganda and Kenya have a trade dispute which is being referred to and being negotiated among the Republic, the professionals of the Republic, and being brought before the summit, is the reason the EAC exists, and that is in accordance with the rules for which it was supposed to work. It's just as if we as Kenyans accepted that just because we have, I don't know, Alan, what you're trying to argue here about articles on paper. The EAC is a treaty. So we are arguing here about a treaty that exists, and it's the treaty that we can interpret. If you have a problem with that, please check out of this discussion. We do not like people trolling us at the IEA. But the point I'm making is here that we have the EAC existing as a treaty. It is signed by all the sovereign members of the treaty. If you have a problem with that, that's a debatable political point, but that the IEA is not arguing that. Alan, you can have that argument outside our facility. And I will not allow any more trolling of this kind here. So secondly, if you have a problem, please get out. So I will only respond to Rose. Rose, the point is the reason institutions exist, including the EAC Legislative Assembly, the Secretariat, and the dispute settlement mechanisms, is because countries have realized that when these obligations, when these clashes take place, we are supposed to refer them to some kind of arbitration. That is the way it is solved. It happens even at the WTO. It happens even at the EAC. They have mechanisms for settling disputes about standards and about quotas and about how countries deal with questions that arise. So we can talk about the effectiveness of those mechanisms. But the very idea that we will have a treaty and the EAC without disputes arising is, in my view, inconceivable. If disputes arise, are they being taken through the right mechanisms? And that mechanism is what tells us that it is. Just like we in Kenya have a constitution, disputes arise between members of different corporations, between individuals, and we refer them to courts. Why? Because courts have been established under our constitution as the mechanism for dispute settlement. So that's an essential thing for us to do. And I think it's not completely exact. It's not exactly right to refer to the fact that differences exist as showing that either Tanzania is not interested in the EAC treaty, they're still members. The only thing that would show us that they're not interested is if they checked out. Then that would be to tell us that the EAC does not serve their purposes any longer. So I guess I hope that's a clear sense of it. Whatever free trade areas, whatever agreements countries as sovereign countries enter into, they always serve the right to refer to a mechanism for settling disputes, and the EAC has that as well. So we think, in my view, it's not a sign that the EAC is failing at all. It's just a sign that these disputes arise and there's a mechanism for solving them. We can talk about whether that mechanism works quickly enough or whether it's a recurring issue that needs a little bit more settlement, but the mechanisms for settling issues and the decision-making body for the EAC is the summit, which is that meeting of presidents. And they have secretariats and they usually delegate authority to the ministries to solve those issues and then to provide reports which the summit would approve. So I hope that's a clear, that's clearer. Thank you. Guys, we have just a couple more minutes before we conclude. So unless a question comes in, I'll go back to my colleague Emmanuel to have any final comments. Emmanuel, do you have any final comments?
Yes, I think it's very good to like Kwame said, disagreements do not mean that are not a signal of a lack of commitment, and even the kind of fissures we see even externally in an institution like NAFTA or the EU are not signals of a lack of commitment. There's a treaty. All parties have signed to it. They have some short-term disagreements here and there, but until they say they're out, like until the United Kingdom said it was out of the European Union, it was still in, and it was still despite its differences, even at the political level, the same thing. There could be issues, but they're not indicators of a lack of commitment. And also, it should be said that a president, say Tshisekedi, actually putting in his political capital to enter into an agreement, and the EAC also putting their political capital behind the Congo, is an indication of what the bureaucracy, the leaders of these states believe that their own body politic thinks about what they're about to do. So, I mean, if we look at the application made by the Sudan actually did make an application a few years back, and that application was rejected, right? So that could actually have been a reflection of what the people themselves thought about, the idea of Sudan joining in. Yeah. So I think we should differentiate that and not leave it in the gray, but have the article give us that clear delineation point and say, look, these are just disagreements. Yeah.
Thanks. I haven't seen any other questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think as we agreed, this meeting was to end at 11:30. So let me just say final things. One, an accession process based on an application from the DRC is going on. It is still being considered by the state parties or the secretariat of the EAC on behalf of the members. I think a little bit more of consultations will take place here and there. A decision will be made. So we at the Institute of Economic Affairs will continue to track that and let you know. So that's the first. The second is the logic of the EAC is available in the EAC treaty itself. And I think understanding, maybe we should have taken a little bit more time to take us through what the logic of the treaty is and some of it. But as we said, it goes through 4-stage processes, which starts with the customs union, the free trade area or common market, a monetary union, which is a single currency, and a political federation. The customs union is the most advanced so far, but it is not complete because we still have some of those differences, including those that have been mentioned. I'd also like to state that the function of the EAC and its institutions mean that we have a difference between countries, and we did not want this to be a Kenya-specific agreement. Many East African Community member states have differences with each other, and those differences are handled through the institutions that have been established by the EAC, giving legitimacy to the fact that every member accepts that part of what it means to be a member is to use the institutions established by the EAC treaty itself to resolve whatever questions are there. So to the extent that we have never had a member of the EAC exit, even if the plan to, the facility or the opportunity to exit exists, to the extent that nobody has cited it, equivalent to what the UK did with Brexit, it means then that so far we can tell that members think that the institution serves their purpose sufficiently rather. And also, most of the trade that is taking place within East African countries make East African countries natural members, natural partners to each other for the purposes of trade, at least, because most of the trade across East African countries, each country in the EAC finds its largest trade member or second largest trade member as a member of the EAC, whether by exports or whether by imports. So the function of trade, at least the economic integration part, is one that is self-evident. Thirdly, there are some, I understand, who, for reasons that they haven't stated, including some such as Alan, I think he's left. We're grateful that he was here. Some people are naturally, or for some reason, have reasons to contest. He says, for instance, that I would say a huge no to the DRC. I think this process has been going on for 3 years. There's a thorough process. We think that it is very methodical, and if they've supplied whatever decision comes up, will be made. My personal preference is that the EAC provides a much better integration model, a much better and more tractable in the sense that the number of members is actually a manageable one as opposed to a continental area, but also that the continental free trade area, which many Africans are very enthusiastic about, in itself would only be successful if successful integration has been shown at the regional level or in other ways. So this would be the building blocks, the natural building blocks for the African Continental Free Trade Area. For that reason, we must wish the EAC well and hope that its integration mechanism works well enough to be used as part of the building blocks for the African Continental Free Trade Area. The final one is that there will be significant gains and dynamic effects of the joining of the DRC, as it is their advantages. Of course, there are also challenges that comes with field membership, including the political and social effects of that, which many neighbors are nervous about, including some of those that we've spoken about here. But on the whole, I think this progress seems to be going on, and it is possible that in the next year or maybe two, a final decision will be made about the possible accession. But given how far it's gone, I think many people remain hopeful. We understand as well that there are people who were concerned about values, they're concerned about the differences, and that is part of what these debates should be about. And so maybe a different forum and a different platform would actually allow us to say, what exactly are some of the risks to East Africa, to Kenya itself, from the accession of new members into the EAC. But as I conclude, the fact that we have members of the African continent of sovereign countries applying is, in our view, a reflection of the demand for membership into the EAC. And on the whole, that's a good thing. Let the secretariats, so we hope that the secretariats and the institutions that have been set forward do the right job and issue the reports. We would have preferred greater transparency about what the effects are and what remains to be done, but this report have not been placed in the public domain, and perhaps that suggests something that the EAC itself should also fix. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all for being here. We hope this conversation has been useful. We'll ask Emmanuel to fix, rather to finish up with the brief, which is being written as part of the discussion today. It will be made available on our website, and the presentation will also be available. So I thank you for attending our meeting today.